Welcome to another Build Day TV episode. I'm Alastair Cooke, and we're continuing our series of deploying infrastructure onto the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure product. Really cool in this series, or this episode, we're going to deploy an actual vSphere cluster on bare metal inside of Oracle. And by we, I mean Thom. How are you doing this morning, Thom?
I'm doing fantastic. Yourself?
I'm good. I'm looking forward to this one because I'm a long-time VMware vSphere guy and now doing a lot of public cloud and being able to transition workloads that don't suit being rebuilt to be cloud native to a cloud-based VMware solution seems like a really useful feature. And of course, this was only just recently launched by Oracle, so it's doubly interesting.
Yeah, it's great to get your hands on right at the beginning and kick the tires on it.
What are we going to do? We've got a virtual cloud network already deployed. What do we need to do to get a big pile of VMware in there?
Really, the first thing you need to do is you need to search for it. So as we've stated before, the search bar is a very efficient way to get around. And whenever you're creating software-defined data centers, it's just like the VCN and everything. You start with just clicking the button to go in. Clicking the button will bring up your configuration page.
So we're straight into a wizard for deploying the actual cluster.
Correct. As soon as you get to the VMware solution page, you go straight into a wizard. So the name is going to come through for everything that you deploy. So this name shows through on your vCenter server. It becomes part of the fully qualified domain on that, on your NSX-T manager, and throughout every component, even on your host, the SDDC name gets appended as part of the host name. So
you treat it as the top level domain name for this particular SDDC?
Correct, yeah. So it'll come through and it'll be whatever is in this field dash vCenter is going to be the actual host name of the vCenter server. So you want to make sure it's descriptive and it fits your enterprise's naming standard. We type it in. We're going for CTOA for the CTO advisor, who's our partners in this. OCVs, which is the service we're setting up. And then you choose your compartment, which is just a way that you go through and organize the different resources inside Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. So ours is the default VMware software version. You have a couple of choices for what version of VMware that you're going to deploy. You're either going to deploy 6.5 update 3 or 6.7 update 3. As our on-premises environment that we're hoping to link up is 6.7 update 3, we're going to choose that. The minimum host required to deploy is 3. Since this deploys vSAN and all flash on NVMe, you need at least 3 hosts in order to do it.
That's going to perform pretty well then.
Yes, it's going to be very performant, and you get a lot of capacity, and it's very fast. So we'll dig in there and we'll see once the environment is up.
And I could add more hosts later on if my requirements expand out to that 64 maximum size.
Correct. Yeah, you could go and click a button and add another host, and it'll deploy and add it into your cluster up to 64. The hosts are very, very good size, so 64 of them would be a pretty massive infrastructure.
Oh, I always like a limit on my infrastructure that I'm never going to reach. So I'm very happy with that.
Yeah, I would like to know what you're doing if you reach 64 hosts in this one cluster. All right, so a very interesting feature, something that is, as far as I know, unique to Oracle, is that you get root access into the ESXi hosts whenever they're deployed. They are bare metal hosts, and you can log in and install VIBs or do whatever you need to do.
So we get to actually SSH onto the ESX servers if that's what we require in order to deploy software. That's unusual for a vSphere managed solution from a cloud provider.
Right. So this is just vSphere. So whenever you deploy it, you get in there and you get VMware full access, just like it is on your on-premises data center. As part of that, you need to generate an SSH key. There are a couple of different ways that you can do this. If you're on a Mac or on Linux, it's just a terminal command that you would use. As you can tell, I'm on Windows, and it's not quite that easy, but it's pretty simple once you install PuTTY. So if you're going to install PuTTY, that's a SSH client that comes with other fun tools now.
So then you could use PuTTyGen that's part of PuTTY to create the SSH key.
Correct. Yeah. So we're going to use PuTTyGen to generate this key. Oracle has some documentation for that. If you click the link that is in the call out button, there actually is step-by-step documentation for how to generate this if you don't exactly know how. So in PuTTyGen, it asks you to move your mouse around inside the window to create some random
entropy,
random goodness to go in there to flavor the key.
And for anybody that uses pre-shared key authentication for connecting to Linux boxes or to, I guess it is primarily to Linux boxes without having to remember passwords, this is exactly the same process.
Right, and there's something I learned through this process is that you can connect to an ESXi host with a key without needing to enter the password. I've been doing this for a very long time and wasn't aware. So that's cool. It's very neat that's possible. So when you're using PuTTyGen, a lot of time you'll want to come down and you want to click the save public key and private key. That you won't be able to deploy the ESXi host if you do use the proprietary public key format that comes out of PuTTyGen. So instead, you actually have to click this OpenSSH key material. You need to copy and paste that into a file and save the key as manually. That's a little pro tip that we learned the hard way whenever we're trying to deploy the first data center, that it needs to be an OpenSSH compatible key and not a public key just saved out of PuTTyGen. So what we'll do with that is we're just going to save this as, and then whenever you do save the private key, it saves it as a PuTTY proprietary key. You save that out.
And that works really nicely when you're using PuTTY, but you'll want to use a different mechanism to get a PEM file if you're doing this on anything but Windows.
Right. Yes, I'm very Windows centric with this, so that's how we've had it set up here.
And most enterprise organizations are very Windows centric.
It's asking you for your key.
Mm-hmm.
Right here. We'll go ahead and select the key that we saved. And we want to make sure that you know the availability zone that you're deploying into. It will allow you to set up fault domains, make sure that you know where your servers are if you're trying to set things within the same availability zone.
We need the same availability zone to get the low latency, to get the benefit of having an all-flash-based vSAN underneath this.
Correct. So when we're going to go in, we're going to choose our CIDR, choose the VCN that we created earlier.
And of course, we have a video earlier for showing us creating that VCN.
Yep. And here you can choose if you want to, if you had already pre-made all your subnets and VLANs, you can choose to do that, or you can also choose to create a whole new one. And this will allow VMware to create the subnets that it needs, and then the Oracle knows how they want it carved up and how that they've tested it. So that's
so they're going to implement their best practice networking if you say go create it for yourself.
Right. Otherwise, you're going to have to go in and create a lot of the networking stuff manually. And if you can automate it, and you're trying to do this as a quick win, just going a few clicks and get a VMware infrastructure.
But the select existing would be probably useful if there is a separate networks team who are creating all of the subnets in your Oracle environment. Yes.
So they would have already went through the documentation and created the best practice for you. And in the VCN creation video, we went through a little bit of a primer and discussion about the CIDR networks. Whenever we're doing the the configuration, we needed to make sure we had more IP address space than we needed for VMware because we wanted to deploy other Oracle infrastructure inside of it. So here, the minimum size is a /22 network. And as you can see in my dropdown,
you might have done this before.
We might have done that before. So this will create just enough IP address space and just enough subnets to deploy your NSX Edge, your NSX, your hosts, your vCenter.
But the subnets that it's creating aren't just little tiny subnets for our 3 hosts. They're fully sized to the full 64 host capability.
Correct, yeah. And it says that it's available. Make sure there's no resources that do a conflict here, but it'll tell you, it'll give you a little list of everything that's going to create, just in case you decide, I don't really want it to be 0 after all. I want to change the different settings. Or if you wanted to rename to meet a network team naming convention. And then you have an optional step here to create your first overlay network within NSX. So if you choose not to, it'll just create a blank VMware environment. You go in and you do your NSX-T configurations, you do all the configurations. If you're wanting a network to start with, it's already fully populated, ready to go with all of the NAT rules, routing rules, you can pop it in here. And for the sake of this exercise, our architect has given us a range of IPs and have broken them down into subnets for management, application, database, and such. So we're going to just choose one of those and let Oracle do the first step for us. And we have a editing function. We can choose if we said, oh, we made a mistake. I think we're ready to go.
It was a summary of everything that was going to be built, and away it goes to build it.
Yep. So that's about 15 minutes of configuration for problems. Internal error for the vMotion subnet. And there we go.
One retry and we're away again.
Well, fingers crossed. So we'll see. Provisioning takes 2.5 hours, and it really does take the 2.5 hours in order to provision it, because it spins up bare metal host, it installs everything to your specifications, gets vSAN configured, and here's a summary. You can see what's been created and what's still provisioning.
So 3 vSphere hosts with vSAN, with NSX, and all of the NSX Edge, and all of the networking for these things is all deployed out automatically in this 2.5 hours. That suggests that it might be time for us to go and have a cup of coffee or a drink and come back to this a little later on.
Yep, that sounds like a good idea.
And so through the magic of Jeffrey Powell's awesome work on the video editing, we're going to skip the time. All right, it's now 2.5 hours later for us and seconds later for you, and it looks like we have a successful deployment here, Thom.
Yeah, everything went through. No errors that were reported.
So let's take a look at what we actually ended up with on this deployed software-defined data center.
Sure. So whenever you look at the details, it gives you a lot of statistics and connectivity. So we have a 6.7 Update 3 VMware solution. It has NSX, it has vCenter, and it's running vSAN. We have 3 ESXi hosts that show up as a compute instance, and they're the bare metal ESXi servers.
Right. That's nice. And we've got all of the credentials available in there as the default credentials that are first created. All right. And so can we do anything with this vSphere environment we've deployed right now, just to show that working vSphere?
Sure. So as you can see, it's got the vSphere fully qualified domain name and also the IP address. There is no DNS resolution into that as of right now in our environment. So we're going to copy out the IP address that's inside of our VCN network. And then earlier we had configured the connectivity to get into the jump host through through the Fast Connect. So we're in there now. We're going to use the jump host to connect to the vSphere client. So as you can see, it popped up really, really fast. And we can choose the HTML5 client.
As we should, since we don't really want to be going and installing a Flash.
Yeah. And we'll work on getting the certificates installed and all of that in a second. But we're going to go ahead and log in. And notice we get administrator. So they're giving us full administrator rights to this vCenter.
So we can do whatever we want to the vCenter server as well.
Yes, it is vCenter. There is no extra added to it. It's a fully functional VMware vCenter environment. This includes 3 hosts and all of your management, and all your management. So your NSX, all the other stuff that I've mentioned.
Yeah.
It's fully configured and ready to go. And it includes the workload resource group where you would put your workloads.
Right.
So if we click on just one of the hosts, we'll see what it's got. It's got 104 logical processors. So there's a lot of processors.
Yeah. So presumably that's 26 cores per socket with hyperthreading enabled.
Let's see. So as you see, as I'm clicking around, I'm looking at everything. It's got vSAN performance. You can monitor that. If you look at the data storage, you got your vSAN cluster that has 122 terabytes of NVMe backing it. So that's quite a bit of
reasonable amount of capacity off 3 nodes.
Yeah, that is quite a bit of capacity. You're also looking at 768 gig of RAM. So it's going to
That's a fairly capable initial 3-node cluster.
Yep. Yes. So the 3 nodes to get you started are going to take you a long way in getting your workloads up and running, and for us getting some Horizon out there and giving us that extra capacity that we're looking for. So we now have an active vCenter. We don't have any Active Directory created. This is just a completely blank vCenter.
So it's just using the vSphere.local authentication at this point.
Yes, vSphere.local authentication. It's using the default DNS from the Oracle environment, all that it's managing. It cannot communicate. It can communicate via IP, but it can't do name resolution back to Chicago.
Right. We haven't integrated the OCI DNS with the Chicago DNS.
Right.
And we possibly won't. We might choose to extend our Chicago DNS into the OCI environment and provide our own DNS inside this vSphere cluster.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of ways we can do it. We can do that. We can create a trust and have just conditional forwarders pointing one way or another. So there's many ways we can design that. But right now, if we were wanting to do linked mode, we have to have DNS in place, at least for that.
So what's the plan for DNS in this case?
So in this case, we're going to be deploying a Windows Server 2019 inside of the vCenter, inside the vSphere environment. We're going to just deploy a VM. We're going to create a Active Directory domain, get the trust set up, and we'll manage DNS, and we'll do authentication through that.
So is any of that specific to the OCI or the OCVs? Anything that's specific to the Oracle environment? Or is that absolutely generic? This is what you do if you had a brand new vSphere cluster in a new data center.
It's exactly the same as if you had the brand new vCenter spun up. So you create your template, create your virtual machine, promote it to Active Directory. There's no Oracle specifics in there. You do have to make sure that your security and routing are set up right to be able to do the communication between your data center and Oracle, but there's no special requirements that you would need to do for getting it to work otherwise.
So really, we've just got a standard vSphere cluster deployed on OCI now. We haven't got anything particularly, they've provided us a deployment methodology rather than an as a service, here's a vSphere cluster, here's a very rapid deployment.
Right.
Because they're letting us have full control. I don't imagine they want to be doing the patching of the vSphere environment for us now.
Yeah, right. At this point, the keys are in our hands. We can upgrade as we wish. We can do what we need to do for patching. So it's now
what
just
networking for virtual machines did we get out of the gate?
For virtual machines, we have one segment that's the workload segment, and it is we set it up in the deployment as 10.255.9.0/24.
Right.
So it's got a D, and we'll go and open up NSX at this point. So we'll go NSX Manager. We'll investigate that a little bit more. So once again, we get admin. We don't have any special account.
There's no lower privileged account that we need to use at this point. That's nice.
Right. Yeah, you've got everything you need. It's up to you to create lower privileged accounts, like you said. There's a lot of stuff. I understand. No, thank you. But as you can see, it was as a service. I've clicked a few buttons and it deployed it, but it's still the out-of-box experience. You saw the little pop-ups and everything. So in NSX-T, it's creating two segments, but the tier 1 segment that we have is entitled workload. You're welcome to rename that as you need to meet your naming convention.
Typically add additional networks in there that map back to your applications.
Yes. Yeah, so from here, it's just, NSX-T, we can add a new subnet. We'll call it app. We'll connect it into our tier 1 gateway. The subnet on this one will be... So whenever you're doing NSX and you're adding a new subnet, you will probably want to creating a new segment. You'll want to assign a subnet to it. And what I'm doing here is I've created a gateway address of 10.255.8.1/24. The pre-existing workload domain work mode segment we created during install was .9.
Right.
So that's what this is doing. And if we want, we can create a DHCP range for this, 150 to 160. We may want just a little for if we're deploying a template.
Yeah.
Word to the wise, when you're working with NSX-T, if you don't click apply, it goes away. So here, you have to click add items.
Okay.
Otherwise, it disappears.
The interesting joys of the different UIs that we get along the way.
Oh, yeah. So you do that, you click add. So now this subnet is going to have a gateway and DHCP. So it'll be able to communicate on the local network. So we've saved it. In the next few minutes, we'll see it pop up over here. So something that you can get really hung up with whenever you're using this is with, in particular, NAT. I speak from experience. So if you're looking just not through the advanced, through the basic settings for NSX-T, it doesn't look like there are any NAT rules. However, the engineers are way smarter than I am looking at that, and they're saying, we're doing it in advanced secure networking and security. So there's really fine-grained NAT rules in here. So as you can see, and it's one of the reasons we chose to deploy a workload VM or workload segment whenever we kicked it off, is because there are no SNAT, no natting, and natting rules for if you're trying to get out to a local subnet versus if you're trying to get out to the internet or whatever. So if a machine in the 255.9.0 subnet is trying to get out to the internet, it'll NAT and be able to communicate. And it won't be able to communicate, it won't NAT if it's anything coming in from, say, the VCN. So it's very slick that they went, and part of Oracle's customization and quality of life enhancements, they went in and they've added all these rules. And I like that because I can either expand the subnet, the bits, and change the source on those to make it bigger for all my things, or I can just extract and programmatically put the stuff in for any additional ranges, segments that we're going to have. No matter what it is, it's just VMware. You've got full full range and full control.
So all of the skills that you've built up around these same technologies on premises are directly translatable here.
Yeah, they're surprisingly translatable. They're one for one.
Now, in order to get from these subnets inside NSX on the VMware side back into Chicago, it's got to go through some routing somewhere. Is
Correct.
there an element of that I need to configure on Oracle?
Yes, you will, especially for any additional segments that you do. But Oracle has provided some quick actions in this little bar that's at the top of your software-defined data center detail screen for connectivity, because there's a lot of different places where you have to add connectivity if you're going to route back to, say, Chicago. And Oracle has scripted that. For instance, this first button is saying configure connectivity to your on-premises network, which, as you said, that's exactly what we're trying to do. So we're going to walk through this wizard and we can see what it does once we're done.
So you remember that in a previous video, we set up the fast connect and the dynamic routing gateway to allow connectivity between this virtual cloud network in Chicago. And now we're doing that for the workload networks in addition.
Yep. Yeah. So here you can say, the workload CIDR that we're interested in is a 10.255.9.0 subnet. And we're wanting to be able to communicate with the 10.0.0.0/9. So that's our on-premises and anything we might add in the future around there. So whenever you add that, it then tells you everything that it's going to change. So first off, it's going to your route table attached to your NSX Edge uplink. It's going to add a route. That route is going to you go on premises through the dynamic gateway, and then it's going to create a new route table that has this network goes into NSX. So when it says private IP, that means that there's a load balance or a virtual IP that's created, and that's going to point any traffic that needs to go into the 255.9.0 subnet into that. And for network security groups, it actually goes ahead and it adds the rules to allow ingress and egress back to Chicago. This is all stuff that you could do yourself, and I have done it myself. But in this case, you can just click one button and click apply.
If you didn't need to explain it to me, it will be done in seconds.
Yeah. So because what took me 5 minutes to explain could be done in seconds, as long as you knew your source and destination CIDRs. See, it says it configured all that. It's done.
Now we could deploy some virtual machines inside the vSphere environment and have connectivity from them back to our on-premises environment.
Yep.
And the additional subnet. What else do we need to show of the actual vSphere environment that's deployed? We've seen the cluster, we've seen the individual host configurations, we've seen storage and networking, we've seen the NSX configuration, and we've shown particularly that you get full administrative access to everything here. Is there anything else we should show at this point about what gets deployed?
I think that's kind of the whole kit and caboodle with it. It's all there. It's all VMware. We've got it connected back to the data center. So I think it's just time to start building those VMs.
So the next stage for the integration of this OCVs data center with our on-premises Chicago data center is going to be to build up that Active Directory domain and get DNS and authentication working between the two sites before you start integrating the two vCenters together. Yeah,
that's the preferred way, the way that I think that would work the smoothest, just one segment at a time.
Okay, well, let's close out this video as we've deployed the vSphere cluster for the first time, or second time since you saw that we've done a dry run on this one.
Yeah.
So we've deployed our cluster, we've made it accessible from our on-premises environment, although we haven't yet integrated with that. We'll do another video, I think, once Thom's built out the Active Directory, because I think we've probably got resources elsewhere on building up the Active Directory. We'll come back and do the integration of the vSphere environment and maybe start thinking about moving some workloads, those kinds of things in a following video. So thanks, Tom. That was awesome. Great to see how much we can get and how little of our engineering time was required to do it. A lot of the time was in that magic of time travel that Jeffrey arranged for us to not be waiting for those 2.5 hours.
Yep.
Thank you for joining us in this video. Stay tuned for more Build Day TV episodes. We publish these every Sunday, and there's going to be more content coming out looking at the Oracle Cloud VMware Solution and Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. And as always, there will be more content on other topics as time progresses. So subscribe, like, hit the bell notification. There we go. I'm trying to hit all of my YouTuber sayings. And we'll see you on the next video.